Good morning, guys. It's very good for me to be here. I'm excited to be here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ben Watson, and I had the privilege, the very distinct privilege of being a co-pastor here at Circle Church for 2 years. And so it is good to be back. I just graduated last year, and there's no place like Circle Church. That's definitely for sure. So I was coming up to visit, and Isaac and Lexi were gracious enough to give me the opportunity to come back. So thank you guys. Also, Isaac is amazing. I was watching his welcome, and I was like, "Ooh, wow!" You know, like an artist, you watch somebody else paint, and you're like, "Oh, okay, that was interesting. Wow, oh, wow, man, that's creative." You know, and I was watching him doing that, and then he goes and he just like shreds on the electric guitar, and I'm like, wow, he's so much better than me. Wow, you know. So anyway, so they're doing amazing. You know, and just quick side note. In the time that I was here at Walla Walla, I got to see Circle Church handed off several times before I handed it off. And if there's one thing I know, it's that this church is about the community, it's about the students, it's about the people that come here, and it changes as it needs to. So not only did I have a lot of faith in Isaac and Lexi taking over the church, but also I just want to applaud them and you guys for continuing Circle Church and helping it to be what church is supposed to be, a community, a family. So enough about that. I don't know if you guys were too busy to notice or cramming for midterms or whatever, but this week the Grammys happened. Yes. You might not have known. I didn't know, and I was going to the gym to do some cardio, and this is bad, but I need a distraction while I'm doing cardio. And so I pulled up the TV app on my phone, and it was the Grammys are. I was like, oh, okay. And so I was watching it, and the Grammys are fun. The Grammys are fun because they're just as prestigious as the Oscars or the Emmys or some of these super fancy awards, and everybody's super dressed up, and it's this huge event. But what's fun about it is that musicians, no disrespect to our amazing musicians that we had this morning, musicians, but especially celebrity musicians, are just that little bit more unhinged, you know? And so you see everybody's dressed up at the Grammys, but you're oh, somebody's gonna say something weird, something's gonna happen. All the Swifties are taking notes on every possible point of all right, mark 46:25 and get that to the lip reader lady, and so she can tell us what Taylor said right now. And everybody's watching it. We're watching it intensely, and it's fun. But there was a moment kind of early on in the program that stuck out to me. There was a performance that stuck out to me, and it was actually by an artist that I don't personally really listen to, not because of hate or anything, but just I don't really listen to them. It's the artist Luke Combs, and he's a country artist and a musician and very talented. I gotta say, he's very talented. And so he's coming up, and they're doing the thing where they get the stage ready. And as they're kind of getting the stage ready, they play this video, so you're not watching them move all the set pieces around and stuff. And in this video, he's talking about he remembers being a kid in his dad's truck driving down the road, listening to this song called "Fast Car." And "Fast Car," if you haven't heard it, it's one of the greatest acoustic songs of all time by Tracy Chapman. Absolutely amazing song. And he's talking about he remembers listening to this with his dad. And so when he was making his last album, he was you know what? I love that song so much, and it means so much to me personally. I'm going to add that to my album and do a cover of it. Obviously, all rights reserved and everything. But he adds it to his album, and then it becomes super popular. People are streaming it a ton. He's performing it at all his concerts, and now he's been asked to perform it at the Grammys. And what he says is he's man, I'm just so honored and humbled because I did this song because I covered this song because it meant something to me. And for him, he was I can't believe people are mentioning me in the same sentence as Tracy Chapman because she's the GOAT and she's amazing. And he's I'm just so honored to even be considered doing one of her songs and doing it well. And so it's wow, okay, that's nice, that's humble of him. And then it cuts to the performance, and you see somebody playing the guitar, and the hands are not Luke Combs' hands. and you're like, who is this? And then it like pans out a little bit more, and it's Tracy Chapman, and it's like really cool. She's like playing the guitar. She does like the opening verse, and then they kind of do it as a duet. It's also really cool because she rarely does like public appearances and like plays that song publicly. So anyways, it was just like a really cool moment. And he was like, doing the whole like musicians when they're paying respect, they're always like, oh yeah, which I don't know, maybe that's a little sacrilegious, but it's okay. It's like, wow, this person's amazing. I'm all my honor and respect to them. And, yeah, it was really cool. And what I was thinking about was, when I was watching that, was like, man, he's really comfortable in his identity, because like that was his moment for the spotlight. Like that was his time. And like, yes, he was in the spotlight. It was just really the two of them up there, in front of a huge live audience with all these crazy, legendary musicians, and then they're on national television. So that's like his spotlight moment. But he still took the time to say, hey, like, I know this moment's kind of about me, but really I want to pay homage and respect to, like, this song. I didn't write it. Like, it came from her. And he was comfortable enough in his own identity not to be like, yes, this is like about me, and recognize that it was about something else. And so as I was watching that, I couldn't help thinking about Circle Church, because as we went through my time here at Circle Church, if any of you were here for it, we talked a lot about identity. We talked a lot about identity. We talked a lot about the idea of identity as like, who are we? Who does God say that we are? Who does God want us to be? Who does God expect us to be? What are we supposed to be doing, or what are we supposed to be looking like or acting like? And even like church identity, like what is the church? What is the church supposed to look like? What is the church supposed to act like? What's our identity as a group, as a church? What's our identity as individuals? What are we supposed to be doing? And we covered a lot, and we talked about a lot, and I loved every second of studying and going through those discussions with you guys. But there was something that post-graduating, I realized that it wasn't that it was missing, but it was something that I think is difficult to realize when you're in college, and difficult to realize when you're here. Because the thing is, Walla Walla is really like the best college campus community like ever. Like, it's just so much great community. There's such great events. There's ASWU, there's the chaplain's office, there's like CHE, and when it comes to like worship stuff, we have the amazing like student churches like Circle Church and Berean and Nuestra and Renew, and we have all those great options for whatever you're looking for. We have Vespers, we have the university church stuff, we have awesome ministries throughout the week like Hubach and Fireside, and we have all these great things that happen. But the thing is, like, at least in my experience, like as a theology major, where like my classes are like, oh, let's talk about God. I mean, at least some of the time. You're like, it's hard not to live for the weekend. You know what I mean? Like, it's so easy for us as college students to like say, all right, we're just going to survive these like 5 days of classes, or like maybe your last class on Friday gets out early, and you're like, all right, like I made it to like the end finish line, and like now it's the weekend. And maybe if you're dedicated enough, you're like, okay, I'm going to take some time out of this weekend time to go and worship God, and like go to Vespers and go to church, and like maybe go on a hike or whatever. I'm going to spend time with friends, whatever that looks like. And if you're super dedicated, maybe you take some time for like personal study, and you're like, oh, I'm going to like open the Bible and actually like read it for myself. And while I'm not saying that that's like bad or unrealistic, I'm just saying I think we're living for the weekend here, and we're not necessarily doing something that lasts for like every single day of the week, every single day of our lives. Like, it is beautiful and amazing that all of you guys are here this morning, and like that's good. Keep doing that. Keep being a part of church. And maybe you're involved in CHE and doing service opportunities. But I mean, even then, a lot of those are on the weekend, because the weekend's when we have time to do things, because we're so busy. And what I don't want you guys to get stuck in is you get through this like college time, you survive and live for the weekend. The weekend's when you come. Sabbath is the day of rest and the day of worship. And so, okay, Sabbath, as long as like it's like sundown to sundown, like that's when I'm going to give my time to God. But then the rest of it, I gotta cram for that exam. I gotta cram for that lab take home test. Whatever it is, I gotta like do other things. And I don't want us to get caught up in just like, oh yeah, Sabbath, I remember what my identity is, but the rest of the week, it doesn't matter. I want us to be thinking about what it means to actually have like an everyday identity. Because if you think about it, if you took a step back for a second and you said, wow, like, man, like I am a child of God. Like, I'm sure if somebody came up and talked to you about it, you would be like, oh yeah, like I believe in God. I'm always like thinking about God throughout the week when I can. And, it's not like you stop being a Christian throughout the week. But sometimes it feels like God is like a parent, like a divorced parent. And it feels like, yes, like I'm still the son of that person, but he only has custody of me on the weekends. Isn't that crazy? God only has custody of me on the weekends. The rest of the time, it's just like I'm just doing my own thing. God wants to be our God 24/7. He wants to be connected to us and be in a relationship with us constantly. And so how do we do that? How do we, as we're in college, and it's not like those things magically go away that we have to spend time studying for and focusing on, like how do we do this? And also, the reason it's important to talk about this is because after you go out of college, chances are, if you're working a 9-to-5 job, it's going to feel different, and there's going to be that really nice feeling of like you get off at 5 and you're like, oh, like that's it, like I'm done. I can watch a show guilt-free, and it's like the best feeling ever. That's coming. Just teasing that little bit of hope for you. But still, you're working a 9-to-5. You're working Monday through Friday, and then you're going to get to the weekend and be like, oh, okay, it's the weekend. Like, now's that time again. And if you don't pay attention to it and you're not careful, you might end up saying like, oh, this is just kind of the same as it was in college. And I don't really feel like my identity is something that, my identity with God is something that I'm focusing on and thinking about every day. And like I said, those things don't go away. It's difficult. Life happens. Life doesn't stop. Life is a train that keeps on moving. In the words of the great poet, the tortured poet, John Mayer, I'm on my Swifties tonight, or this morning. You can't stop this train. It keeps going. Okay? Life keeps moving. And the nice thing is, though, that when Jesus is talking to us in the Bible, when he's talking to us through Scripture, he doesn't just say, like, hey, do all these things, good luck fitting it into your already crazy life. The nice thing is that he actually lays out for his disciples what that's supposed to look like, how we're supposed to have an everyday identity. And he gives us a term. He gives us a term. The term he gives us for if you want to be connected to God every day, you want to identify as a disciple. And discipleship is something that maybe we throw around in church lingo sometimes, but usually when we think about disciples, we think of 12 guys who lived 2,000 years ago. My Adventist math is off. 2,000 years ago, and it's like hard to relate to. And maybe we like look at them as individuals and be like, oh yeah, when Peter did this, like I can relate to him in that moment. And we think of them as the disciples when in reality, all of us are disciples. Anybody who follows Jesus and wants to have a relationship with him and wants to learn from him and grow with him, that's a disciple. That's what a disciple is. So in John chapter 15, Jesus lays out to his disciples, not just these 12 guys that he's talking to, but anybody who follows him, here's how you're going to have an everyday identity of being connected with me. Here's the things that you're going to want to focus on, and he gives us 3 priorities, 3 things to focus on. So, first of all, right at the beginning of verse 1 of John chapter 15, the first thing he says is, I am the true vine, and he says, you guys are the branches. You guys have probably heard this before. It's one of those great Adventist analogies about wine that we like, but Welch's for the win. But Jesus says, I am the vine, and you guys are the branches. He says, if you want to bear fruit, if you want to be a productive branch, you got to stay connected to me. Which makes sense, right? Like if I went outside to one of the trees on campus and like grabbed off a branch and stuck it in my back pocket, like I wouldn't expect to pull it out like a couple months later and be like, oh wow, like there's a whole tree in my back pocket, which would be weird in general. But like you get what I'm saying. The branch needs to be connected to the tree. And if you had a vine, you wouldn't pull it off the branch and say, oh yes, this vine is like doing so great, it can do so much on its own. No, it has to stay connected to the vine. And that's why Jesus says in verse, let me see if I can find what the actual verse is. Here we go. He says, okay. Wow, I was ahead of my notes. I mean, which is fine. We're just rolling right along. You can't stop the train. Here we go. He says, abide in me, and I will abide in you. A branch can't produce fruit by itself, but must remain in the vine. Likewise, you can't produce fruit unless you abide in me. And that word abide's important. Sometimes we'll just translate it as remain. And remain's good, but the idea of abiding is something a little bit deeper than that. It's the idea of living with, like dwelling among, like you're connected to in a way that's like your life force is connected to him. And that's like what Jesus is saying is like, you've got to be actually connected to me. You've got to be abiding in me. So when we say abiding in me, in Christ, I don't want you guys to just think, oh yeah, that's like just some church language for like, oh yeah, we got to like study our Bible and like maybe pray once a day. Like, no, God is saying, Jesus is saying, you've got to stay connected to me. You've got to be actually literally life force abiding, being continually spiritually and physically and mentally filled and fulfilled by me. It's not even just a relationship. It's something deeper than that. Jesus says you've got to get connected to me if you want to bear fruit. So priority number one that he gives us out of these three priorities is you got to abide. You got to abide with Christ. You got to stay connected to him. And the second thing he says is that basically if you bear fruit, it's a good thing, which is great. And we love analogies. We love parables of Jesus where he loves to give us these analogies that we can dissect and say, okay, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? But what does he mean by bearing fruit? Like, if our goal in life is to stay connected to God so that we can bear fruit, if our goal as disciples is to stay connected to Jesus so that we can bear fruit, what's the fruit that we're going to produce? And thankfully, he doesn't leave us hanging. He says, God is glorified when we produce good fruit. And he says that basically, pausing right before this again, if you were to take an orange branch, like an orange tree branch, and to take it off an orange tree, you would expect it to produce an orange, right? Or like if it was connected to the tree, you would expect it to produce an orange. Or if you had a grapevine branch from a grapevine connected to the grapevine, you would expect it to produce grapes. And so if you are a branch connected to the true vine of Jesus, you would expect to bear fruit. But that's the question we're asking is, what is that actual fruit? What is that? What is the branch connected to the true vine? What is it producing? And in verse 9, Jesus says, as the Father loved me, I have also loved you. Remain or abide in my love. In verse 12, he says, this is my commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. No one has greater love than to give up one's life for one's friends. You are my disciples if you do what I command you. And you guys have probably heard those verses before. It's kind of the like classic martyr line, right? Like nobody has greater love than to give up his life for his friends. And maybe, I don't know about you, but there was times, at least for me growing up, when I heard that and I was like, man, it's kind of daunting. Like you're practicing your jumping like sideways perfectly to stop the bullet from hitting your friend. You're like, okay, I love this guy. I gotta, and I want to have the greatest love. And when we take it here and we take it out of context, it's like, okay, the commandment is to love. The commandment is to love. But what I want us to notice that's significant about this is that in context, Jesus isn't expecting you to have that ability, that kind of great love, just on your own. Because the first priority is to abide with Christ, to stay connected to him, to be drawing your life force from him, to be being continually filled by his Spirit and by his love. And then, as a natural overflow of that, you're going to be loving. You're going to be loving others the way that Jesus loved us and the way that God loves us and loves Jesus. So it's a daunting thing sometimes to feel like, okay, the commandment is to love. The commandment is to love. But I don't want us to miss that the expectation isn't for us to just love on our own. It's a second priority. And these priorities are ordered in a particular way for a particular reason. Because first you abide with Christ, and then only after that can you truly love others. Because Jesus knows what burnout is like. Jesus was literally constantly being surrounded by people, wanting his attention, wanting his healing, wanting his power, wanting to hear what he had to say. And he was constantly saying, guys, give me a minute, give me a day. I'm going to just go up to this mountain real quick and go abide. I'm going to go get reconnected to God. I'm going to draw my life force from the right thing so that I can love the right way, so that I can, after I abide, overflow that love. And then Jesus comes to the third and last priority. The last priority. So first it's abide. Second, it's to love others. These are what disciples are doing. The third and last priority. Jesus starts talking about his relationship and his disciples' relationship with the world. And a lot of times if you go to this section in John chapter 15, you're going to come and the header says something like hate against the world, or like Jesus versus the world. And that's an easy way to look at it. But the key part is actually in the last verses. And he says this. He says, if you are my disciples, you are going to be focused. Sorry, that was not the verse. That was what I wrote. Don't listen to that. Verse 26, here you go. When the Helper comes, whom I will send from the Father, the Spirit of truth, who proceeds from the Father, he will testify about me. You will testify too, because you have been with me from the beginning. And that's how John 15 ends. Jesus says, okay, first of all, you got to be connected to me. You got to be abiding in me. Second, you got to be loving, but only loving after you overflow from being abiding with me and being filled by me. And then after you focus on loving other people, you're going to want to tell people about the goodness. Because over here, you're making sure, okay, I'm making sure I'm taken care of. I'm making sure that I'm getting the goodness of God. And now, as a natural overflow of that goodness, I'm going to make sure I'm loving other people. But it's not just like, okay, man, let me make sure I'm loving people today. It's going to be a natural thing saying, wow, God is so good. I just want to share that with people. And then the third step is I want to share with other people how I got this goodness. Because if people are going to look at you and you're going to say, wow, you don't seem burnt out. You don't seem tired. You don't seem what's going on with your life? You seem happy. In an age where we all have depression and anxiety, you seem good. How is that possible? It's winter quarter. How are you? How is that possible? And you're going to say, okay, well, now that I'm in this third step, this third priority, now I want to share with you how you can do this too. And you tell them, guys, you got to have a relationship. You got to get connected to the true vine. Be a branch of the true vine. And then, you know what? Jesus commands us to love, but the good thing is he doesn't expect us to do it on our own. He calls us to love out of the overflow of being abiding with him. And then you can be like me, and you're just going to want to share this goodness naturally. And quick side note, it's easy for us to get those confused because sometimes as Christians we say, all right, I'm going to start with priority number 3. And I'm going to put on some great programs. I'm going to put together some great ministries. I'm going to talk to those people in my friend group that I've been wanting to talk to. And I'm going to tell them about all the goodness of God. But when that happens, when you just start with the third priority, the problem is you're not working out of the overflow of goodness over here, and so you're just telling people some facts. You're just telling people about God rather than inviting them to have an abiding relationship with him and to find out about him for themselves. So 3 priorities: abide, love others, and bear witness, testify, which sounds crazy, but it's basically just like, tell others the good things that you've experienced and that you have been able to be a part of with your relationship with God. Now, I want to clarify that this is not just an average like Tuesday for Jesus that he's sharing this, because it's easy for us to sometimes read things from Jesus and we're like, okay, that's a great like pointer on like how I should live my life. And it's easy for us to come to things that Jesus says and we're like, all right, I'm going to try to work that into my life. But maybe after this midterm or maybe after this one class is done that everybody says is so hard, or once I'm finally done with my last class from this professor, I'm good. And then I'll try and see how I can work that into my life. And the thing is, 2 things. One, Jesus knew that life happened. He knew that, like, for his disciples that he was talking to right then, they were going to face persecution, they were going to have hardship, they were going to have trouble. That's part of why he talks about the tension between him and the world. And yet he still says, guys, this is important. I want you to focus on this. If you guys are going to be able to have the energy to get through life, to get through those hard things, you have to be abiding with me. You have to be connected with me. And that's the secret. That's the key to having an everyday identity of being connected to God. And like I said, the other thing is, this isn't just an average Tuesday. Jesus is actually telling his disciples this post-foot washing and pre-arrest in the garden. It's actually likely as they're kind of walking over to the garden, where Jesus is going to get arrested, and then that weekend he's going to get crucified and die for all of us. So this isn't just something where the disciples are like, hey, like Jesus, tell us something smart. And he's like, okay, well, here, have this. This is Jesus knowing, looking forward to the cross and thinking, okay, if I could say something to my disciples, these people that I've built a relationship with for the last couple years, what would I say to them? If this is my last chance to truly have a conversation with them, because in the garden, they fell asleep. And then he was kind of whisked away, and there was all these things happening, and they were doubting, they were scared, because they're human. And Jesus, he knows some of that's going to happen. And he looks at his disciples and he says, okay, guys, let me tell you what it's all about. Like all the things that you believe, all the things that I've been working with you to help make sure that you're acting right or behaving right or believing the right things or saying the right things or have enough faith to work these miracles or whatever it is. Guys, like remember that. Don't forget everything you think you know. Remember that training. Now let me give you the secret to living with me and to having a relationship with God every single day. And he says, guys, what it's all about, if you want to be my disciple, you got to abide with me. You got to connect with me. You got to stay connected with me. Not just have a relationship with me, but you got to act like you're a branch to my vine. You got to act like I am the source of your energy, your happiness, and your ability to do life. And then what you're going to do naturally as you overflow from that is you're going to love. And what's awesome is Jesus says, if you love, you're keeping all my commandments for you. So if we can just do that, that's awesome. But Jesus says, I don't even expect you to be loving on your own ability. I expect you to be doing it because you're connected to me. And I'm just going to naturally give you that joy and that happiness so that you can love. And then he says, guys, I got a request for you. Please tell others about this. Tell others about the goodness. Share the goodness of what this relationship is. And maybe right now you guys are at a time in college where you're like, I don't know about that third one. Like maybe I could do it from time to time, but that sounds like a little daunting, a little much. Like I'm literally trying to survive my own life right now. Like I can barely keep control of making it to class on time, getting some homework in, whatever it is. I can barely do that. I don't have time to bear witness to people. And Jesus says, okay, that's fine. I didn't ask you to do that. He says, I asked you to start over here and to have a relationship with me. And maybe even priority 2 sounds daunting and you're like, man, winter quarter, we joke about it, but it's a real thing. And you're like, I don't know how much love I have in my heart. I want to be loving. I know that's all that I have to do. That's all God asked me to do, but I don't know if I can. And Jesus says, guys, that's okay. I don't expect you to just start there. I expect you to start here and have a relationship with me. So even though there's 3 priorities that we want to focus on for having an everyday identity, there's really one that we want to really be starting with and one that we want to be focusing on, and that's abiding. That's abiding with Christ and having a relationship and a connection with him. So if any of this sounds daunting or like too much or like, man, I thought this was going to be something easy I could do every day, like hopefully this will come. But first of all, the challenge is for each of you guys to have a relationship, to see if you can make it deeper than just a friendship, a connection, a belief, and actually say, how can I just be connected to God throughout my day? That's the challenge. And maybe there'll be a time later on when you'll say, wow, okay, this is good. I've been really enjoying this abiding. I want to share goodness with other people. I want to tell people about the goodness of who God is. But this is where you got to start. And maybe you're somebody that you've been in the church your whole life, and maybe you've even studied John 15 before, and you've studied what Jesus wants for you, and you're like, oh yeah, I've heard this before. But I still encourage you, lean into the abiding part, because we're always going to need growth with that. And if you're ever at step 2 or step 3 and you're in charge of a ministry or you're in charge of something, or you're just even feeling like, I feel like I need to talk to that person, and you're feeling inadequate, remember, Jesus doesn't ask you to be adequate. He asks you to just say, hey, come over here, abide with me, and see where we go from here. So that's the challenge. That's the goal. As you guys have classes, as you have work, as you graduate, as you go out into your life, wherever you go, whether you're working a 9 to 5 or you're working something totally different, or crazy things happen in life, Jesus says, I know those things are happening. I know those things that are coming that even you don't know. That's why I want you to stay connected to the true vine. So let's get connected to the true vine, and let's be thinking about that. Let's lean into the abiding as we start to worship with our closing song here tonight. But let's, I keep saying tonight, it's just Circle Church. I'm not used to it. I got unused to the lights. But let's bow our heads and we'll say a word of prayer. Dear God, we thank you for the loving God that you are. We thank you for being a God that just asks us to get connected to you, to abide with you. Sometimes we come to Scripture and it just feels daunting. There's so many commandments. There's so many stories. There's so many things of, we just say, wow, am I good enough? Am I smart enough? And am I pretty enough? And sometimes I just think back and I remember to the garden when Adam and Eve first fell, and the first thing you said when you saw them wasn't, how could you do this? How could you be dumb? The first thing you said was, who told you you were naked? Who told you that you weren't enough for me? Who told you that you weren't perfect the way that I created you? So as we struggle with our own anxieties, depressions, stresses, and things that we're going through in life, help us to lean in, God. Help us to lean into abiding with you, to learn what that looks like for each one of us, and to really experience deeply the kind of love that you have for us, that then we can go and share with the world. We love you, God. Amen.